This video is available in described video. Please see the description below for more details. The iPhone 5 is the phone that had to follow up with the legendary iPhone 4S and 4. That's not an easy task, and it had to undergo many changes. The iPhone 5 is not very popular today, being almost a decade old, but it is still a pretty respectable phone. My model here has been through two owners before me, at least from what I know. It is the 16GB model and has had a battery changed in the past, because it had battery inflation issues which caused warping on the screen. To be honest, before I got it, it used to be in better shape, but I started to use it naked without a case. As a result, it suffered a few scratches and a couple cracks on the screen protector, but it works at least. I used it for a couple years along with another phone. But how about now? How does it hold up now for daily use? Firstly, using a phone this old is a strange decision because phones now can be made very cheaply and still do pretty much everything you need it to do. The reason you buy a used phone now is so that you can enjoy the premium build and features that come with an old flagship phone. With this phone, that build lives up to that expectation. It has a full aluminum build, which is a classic Apple move. That is not a bad thing though, as I prefer it to the more contemporary glass Oreo design of the iPhone 4 and 4S when it comes to durability, which is why I had the confidence to run it naked. The screen is also quite cheap to replace at around $20, and it is a pretty simple procedure for the most part, from what I know. The feel in the hand is exquisite. It feels like it is the perfect form factor for an iPhone. It probably feels like an iPhone 12 mini or something like that, a breed of phone that is seemingly lost to time. This design is quite strange for an iPhone, just because it feels like it's actually supposed to hold up to the test of time. It isn't absurdly thin like the iPhone 6, nor is it covered in glass on both sides. It feels sturdy, but also effortlessly elegant. With regards to the features, the camera I would say is passable, and if you're buying a phone at this price point, you shouldn't really expect a good camera. That said, if you lower your expectations a bit, this camera will do for everyday photography. The screen is decent. It is totally sufficient and of decent brightness. In fact, you may find this screen even beating some new budget phones in this respect. The problem is that it is really small, but that is to be expected from this form factor. I would not watch lots of Netflix or YouTube on this though. In terms of screen resolution, the ultra-competitive smartphone market surprisingly has not made too many improvements, especially when comparing it to newer iPhones. For example, it has the same pixel density of the iPhone 11 at 326 ppi, with the iPhone 5 barely missing 720p, and the iPhone 11 barely making it over 720p. The battery powering the display is also decent. It will last if you don't plan on doing more than texting and calling with it. It can also last with just listening to music, but I would advise not to do too much heavy web browsing, media consumption, or online shopping, though it can handle it in moderation. The area where this phone shines is with its processor. It could also be because of the software, but the point is that this phone runs still quite smoothly. It doesn't hiccup or crash, it isn't blazing fast, but for those who are patient, it holds up quite well, to be honest. It is quite cool, and it's not very buggy at all. That said, it could be that I'm only using very few functions and a limited selection of apps, which probably contributes to that smooth experience. One of the main problems with running a phone this old, and that is just about any phone this old will have this problem, is that none of the apps work. Well, that's an exaggeration, but a good portion of the apps that I want to download won't work. I was able to get popular apps like Spotify, Amazon, Pinterest, and IMDb, but Google Translate won't work, but luckily Bing Translate did. You would likely have to make compromises with the app selection, is what I'm saying. My phone was running iOS 10.3.4. Another really limiting factor with this phone is the storage. At 16 gigabytes, you don't get much room to work with. I had 13 gigabytes of real storage, and I used about 4 gigabytes on Spotify downloading tracks alone. I then spent 1 gigabyte in podcasts, as well as 2 gigabytes downloading roughly one movie. I also have roughly 15 apps, which sounds like a lot, but really isn't. I didn't complain about this in my iPhone 6s video because I had 64 gigabytes on that model, but honestly, I probably should have. If you are planning to use this phone for listening to downloaded music as well, I would recommend finding a 32 gigabyte model if possible. Those are all my major complaints I have with this phone. One small thing that I did notice is that the rear camera is not vertically centered on the glass portions of the back. It also is not concentric with the outer edge, which is also a bit strange. It really is no big deal, but I bet now that you see it, you can't unsee it. The iPhone 5 was a really great phone. In many respects, it is a great phone still, but I would recommend against using it as a daily driver. It is still quite fast, and if you get a phone with a decent battery, it will likely last. That being said, the software is old and will have issues with app compatibility, as well as storage if you're one of the unlucky souls that gets a 16 gigabyte model. For me, this phone is quite special. It is still one of my favorite models because of the physical build. I don't get too much use out of mine personally, but it reminded me of what a well-built phone feels like, as manufacturers now seem to be moving further and further away from that. The iPhone 5 is definitely a blast from the past, even if it isn't as good as it used to be. Next time on Mobile Museum. This phone had a legacy to live up to, and future seeds to sow. The whole world was watching with lots of anticipation. It was Apple's move next.